All right, so now that we can read tasks, we can add tasks, now it's time to figure out how we can check off a task. Now, the actual checking off happens in the task tile, and we need that to be reflected inside our task provider to check off the correct task. And then we need it to be reflected on the task list. So the task list is going to be the one listening for that change. Now, there's a little bit more to it than just that, because in this case, we want to keep the task tile relatively simple. So we want to keep it as a stateless widget. And we don't want it to know about all these things like the data provider or the provider package. What if we could just have it as a sort of dumb widget which just gets information from the task list and renders a task tile as and when needed? So how can we get that checking off behavior while keeping the task tile a very simple widget without it being involved with the provider? So firstly, notice how currently our task tile is a stateless widget. It gets passed a isChecked boolean, a task tile string, a callback to notify the parent when the checkbox gets changed. And then inside the parent, which is the task list ... well, here we used to have a set state which exists inside the checkbox callback to update our tasks. Now, in this case, we don't really have set state anymore because we're no longer inside a stateful widget. So how can we keep this task list being the place where we update the state, because we already have access to our consumer widget, so we already can modify our task data object. And how can we keep it all limited here, keeping this widget being the complex, clever sort of conductor, and keeping our task tile simple and just implementing the things that it gets told to do? So similar to a large company, you might have a middle manager, which is in this case the task list, and then you might have an employee, which just does what the middle manager tells it to do without it needing to decide and be aware of the bigger picture. So keep its job quite simple. So how could we achieve that using what we know about provider? Well, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to delete the set state inside our checkbox callback. And instead, we're going to do that inside our provided task data. So inside here, we're going to create a new method. We'll call that update task. And in this method, we're going to pass over the task that needs the updating. And when we get hold of it, we're going to call task.toggle done. And that, if you remember, comes from our task.dart. So when we defined how a particular task should behave, we created a property called isDone, which can be switched to the opposite of itself using that toggle done method. And that's what we're using right here. But once we're done toggling the task property isDone, then we're going to call that really important method, notify listeners, to update the widgets that are listening to that particular task state so that they rebuild and reflect the current doneness or the checked offness of that task. Now all we have to do is to use it. As I said, we're going to keep our task tile simple, so we're going to keep it exactly the same. It's still going to have a callback. It's going to report back to its superior, which in this case is task list. And it's going to have this callback, which it triggers whenever the user changes the checkbox. So when it checks it off or unchecks it. And inside this callback is where we're going to tap into our task data and call that method update task. And the task that we're going to pass over is going to be the task data.tasks, and it's going to be the one at the current index. So the task tile gets built from our list view builder, and for each item in the task tile, it gets assigned an index. So 0 will be the one at the very top, and then 1 and 2, etc. So in order to get the right task to update, we also have to use that index. But notice how we're using this taskdata.taskIndex now in 3 places. So we can actually refactor this quite easily by going just above the return statement, creating a task item, and we're going to set it to equal taskdata dot tasks at the current index. And now that we have a hold of that task, we can use it in all of these places. So it'll be task.name, task.isDone, and also task is going to go inside here as the one that needs to be updated. So this also simplifies our code and keeps it short and sweet. So now if we hit save and we rerun our app, then we can go into our Todoist app. Let's just add a new task and we can check it off or check off any of the other ones. And we can uncheck them as we need to. So now all that's left is, what if we wanted to delete a task? Because at the moment, even when we check them off, it just says it's done. And we don't want to just check it off and delete it because we don't want to deprive our users of the joy in checking off a list, making sure that everything is crossed off. In fact, sometimes I think I just do things to check things off my list, and it looks really nice when they're all ticked off. But what if they wanted to clean up this to-do list? Well, what if we could get them to click and hold on one of the items, and then it just deletes it out of the list? So that's what we're going to tackle in the next lesson. So for all of that and more, I'll see you there.